We've known for a long time that off the coast of Hawaii, at a certain time of year, humpback whales breed, and they'll carry a calf inside them for for a year. Then they'll come back. So they go up and migrate up to the Arctic. Then they come back and they go back to those breeding grounds and they have their babies. And then the calf is hanging out with the mother and it goes back up for the migrating up to the Arctic, and then it comes back down. That's been known for quite some time. There's been a lot of studies in the breeding area, but one thing that hasn't been captured is actual copulation, actual sex between a male and a female, or just two humpback whales in general. Until now, there has been photographs that have been taken of two humpback whales in copulation. And what you're going to find out today is it's not what you expected. We're going to talk about it on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin. This is the podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. Now, in today's episode, we have a very, very special treat for you. There's some new photos going around of humpback whale having sex. That's right. There's humpback whales having sex, and there's a little bit of a twist to it. And I'm not going to mention it right now. We're going to talk about it during the interview. I have Stephanie Stack from the Pacific Whale Foundation, who was part of the study and part of a new paper that came out talking about the copulation, talking about the sex between the two humpback whales. And we're going to talk about the story of how that all came to be. And the story is quite interesting. Talk about being at the right time, at the right place, at the right time, and having the right people at the right time and the right place. It's just an amazing story. It's something to really be talking about. You'll find out in this interview how much we don't know about humpback whales and how much there's still to know, how many more questions we can ask and answer. And this is a call to all those researchers, all those early career scientists who want to do research on humpback whales or on marine mammals. There's so much more to know, and we need you all there. So I know it's hard to find a job in marine science and conservation, but boy, is there some research to be done. And if you can get a job where you can find something and find some research, or even do the research yourself somehow, some way, I highly recommend it. So this is the interview with Stephanie Stack talking about humpback whale sex and how we captured it, and how now the world knows a little bit about it. And we're hopefully going to find out more on this episode. Enjoy the interview, and we'll talk to you after. Hey, Stephanie, welcome back to the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Are you ready to talk about humpback whales?
Yeah, I am. Let's dive in.
Oh, I can't wait. I feel like it's a huge related news story. We're seeing something we've never been able to see before. This is really, really exciting. We're seeing two whales copulating for the first time. We're actually able to see it. There's pictures. We're going to talk about how this story came to be and why it's so important for just marine mammals in general and whales in general, why it's important to know about this and why it's important for science. But before we get to do that, why don't you just remind the audience, Stephanie, of who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so my name is Stephanie Stack, and I am a humpback whale researcher. I'm originally from Newfoundland, Canada, and presently living in Hawaii on the island of Maui. I'm a PhD student at Griffith University, and I also work as a researcher at the Pacific Whale Foundation.
And I have to admit, folks, if you have not followed Stephanie on her socials, or if you haven't done it yet, I highly recommend that you do. We'll put that into her show notes. Stephanie gets some of the best footage just out in the field. She shares sort of what life is like as a marine mammal scientist, and it's phenomenal to watch. And Stephanie, I've really enjoyed watching you over the past year. I think since the last time we got to sit down and chit chat like this, it's just been so much fun, and I appreciate you sharing what it's like to be you. I mean, going from Hawaii to Australia in 1 year, and then what goes in the ups and downs of that travel and stuff, and it's just absolutely amazing. So I appreciate your science communication effort for sure.
Oh, thanks so much. That's really nice of you. It's a kind of a hobby of mine, and it's super fun. I love sharing what I do. I think I have the best job in the world, really, and I'm happy to share it with people.
I think a lot of people are going to say, yes, you do. You have the best job. You live in some of the greatest places in the world. I mean, going from Newfoundland and one island to the next, and then to a bigger, I guess you can say, island, continent, country, whatever you want to call it. But you get to be out in the blue, and I think that is so cool. What is it about humpback whales that intrigues you so much to study them?
Great question. You know, when I grew up on an island, like you mentioned, and so whales have always just been a part of my life. We've always spent time near the water and on the water, and it's always been a really important part of my life. I have worked with and know lots of fishermen and people who rely on the ocean for their livelihood as well. And I just kind of consider myself a detective. I have a lot of natural curiosity about the world, and I love to kind of uncover new things and piece knowledge together. And there's quite a lot that we still don't know about humpback whales. And so I love that aspect of my work. I love investigating and learning new things for the first time. And this is a great example of that. I never actually expected that I would discover something like this.
Yeah.
It was just amazing, and it's so exciting for me.
Well, yeah, and I have to admit, like up till now, we're going to talk about this in just one second. Up until now, what has been one of the things that you've learned about humpback whales through your research that's really, kind of floored you? Have been like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they do that. That's pretty cool.
So much, actually. I feel like the more time I spend on the water, the more I see unique behaviors or, very interesting things happening that are unexpected and unusual and maybe not well known to researchers. A lot of my work in the last few years has focused on looking at how human activities affect humpback whales and some species of dolphins. And so I've spent a lot of time researching the impacts of the whale watch tourism industry and this new emerging swim with whales tourism industry. I've spoken to you about that before
Yeah.
in a previous episode. And right now, my focus is looking at humpback whale migration dynamics in a changing climate. So we're
Mm.
collecting lots of different data on the demographics of who migrates up and down the coasts of Australia in a given year and how this may be changing in the rapidly changing environment that they're experiencing. So I do spend a fair bit of time on the water watching whales, and every day is different. You always see something new and interesting.
It must be interesting for you to be able to study these whales, not only in Australia but here, like in Hawaii, especially with their connection to sort of their long migration. I assume, and please correct me if I'm wrong, the whales that come to Maui will eventually go up to the Arctic, right? That's sort of their path.
Exactly.
So they pass like
Yeah,
BC and things
Cleveland's
like that.
feed around BC, Southeast Alaska, but even Russian waters as well.
Right, right. So you kind of still have a connection to Canada, I guess is what I was getting to with these whales. They still get you back.
That's right. That's right, yeah. I was pretty proud of this. We got to use some of our Hawaii data recently, in a DFO report about the
Oh,
whale
nice.
stocks in British Columbia that informed a COSAWIC assessment. So that's kind of like a proud moment as a Canadian.
Absolutely. Yeah, to be able to contribute that data to contribute to an animal that hangs out in Canadian waters as well, I think is extremely important. And of course, with climate change, we just don't know how it's going to affect their migration route, especially with everything that goes on, in that trip. It's a very difficult trip, especially with mothers and their calves, and hopefully it doesn't change much, but you just never know with what's happening. So I'm glad you're out there trying to figure that out and helping other researchers and collaborating and to make sure that they're okay. Now, this discovery here is potentially like changes the way we think of whales in a way, in respect of just we've never been able to, as a community, as a science community, we've never really been able to see or document whales, like whale copulation, especially humpback whale copulation. Is that correct?
For some species of whale that's been documented before, but
Gotcha.
never for humpback whales.
And this is important because I mean Maui and like the Hawaii Islands are an area where that happens, at certain times of the year. And there's a whole whale watching industry out there. And so people have the opportunity to potentially witness that, but haven't been able to yet until now. Can you tell us a little bit about like the story of how this all came to be and how the photographs, like such amazing photographs, would be able to document that process?
Yeah, it's really interesting how we haven't seen it up until this point, really, because Hawaii is what's called a breeding and calving ground for this population of humpback whales. So it's where they come on their migration to mate and reproduce, and then they return the following year to give birth to their calf. And in the last year, we've also had the first recorded documentation of a whale giving birth anywhere in the world. That just came out quite recently,
Yeah.
also was filmed here in Hawaii. And so it's amazing how, despite years of research and tons of, people on the water watching whales all the time, we actually hadn't seen it up until now. It's really remarkable.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's absolutely amazing. Amazing. Sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
And so what happened was, this observation, it took place in 2022, so 2 years ago now, and there was, a couple of people out on the water boating recreationally. They were taking a break, and they had their boat shut off and in neutral, and they were just relaxing on the boat, and then they noticed a pair of 2 whales, humpback whales, approaching their boat, and the whales started swimming in circles multiple times around their boat. 2 of the people that were on the boat that day happened to be professional photographers, and they
Nice.
had their great, really high quality camera equipment with them on board the boat. So they decided to take advantage of this opportunity, and they leaned over the side of the boat and held their cameras under the water, hoping to get some beautiful whale imagery is all they were thinking.
Mhm.
And then they got back to shore later that day, and the photographers, sorry, their names are Lyle Kranichfeld and Brandy Romano. They reviewed their photos that they had taken that day and saw what we've all seen now and thought, oh my goodness, what did we capture? And their minds were just blown.
I
So
mean, sorry.
Lyle is a friend of mine. We're connected outside of this, and so he reached out to me, knowing that I study whales, and he said, "Hey, we captured some photos that I think are pretty important. Would you mind taking a look at these?" And I thought, okay, sure. I wasn't really sure what to expect, and my jaw just dropped. I didn't know what to think when I saw these photos. I thought, "Oh my gosh, you've actually captured 2 whales mating for the first time. This is incredible." And the photos, I'm sure you'll probably have seen them. They're in the news everywhere right now, but Andrew can probably make them available somewhere. They're very high quality and really good photographs, so we have fantastic imagery and we can take a really good look at what happened. And so, yeah, we were all really excited and celebrating this first encounter. And then Lyle said to me, one of the whales, I'm not sure if it was a female. Can you look at those and tell for me if it's a male and a female?"
Mhm.
And humpback whales, externally, they have different anatomy. So if you look
Okay.
at the underside of a humpback whale, you can tell if it's a male or a female. The females have something called a hemispheric lobe, and the males lack this. They don't have
Mhm.
it. And so, yeah, he sent me some more photos. We took a good look at the underside of these whales, and I thought, oh, yeah, these are actually 2 males. So it added another layer to the story.
Now I mean, yeah, it definitely adds another layer. I mean, just to go back to the two, is Brandy and Lyle, who took the photographs. Can you imagine just like, oh, I see some whales. Here we are, just having something to eat. Boats off. Let's just put the cameras into the water and let's just see what happens. Let's just take some cool photos of some of these animals, which I mean is fantastic. I mean, they're amazing. I've seen some of the photographs. They're amazing photographers. So I can just imagine just one click and it's just gorgeous photos. But to not know until they got back, until they started to review the footage, being like, oh my gosh, like what have we figured out here? And then to find out even that extra layer, like not only was it they found, the copulation, but also is like the first time it's been captured. Did they know before you told them that that's the first time that's ever been captured?
Yeah, they both have a lot of familiarity with humpback whales and had worked prior in the whale watching industry, and so a lot of folks here on Maui are very knowledgeable about humpback whales and care a lot about them and learn a lot about them. So yeah, they knew and immediately recognized the significance of this moment.
That's perfect. That's awesome. And then again, the added layer to find out that they're two males. I mean, we knew that this is a possibility. We know that marine mammals have shown this type of behavior before, and it's just sort of a natural thing according to what we've seen in a variety of different forms, right? With different animals, not just humpback whales, but we've seen other marine animals be able to do the same thing. Where do you think this goes on in terms of understanding better humpback whales, just in general?
Yeah, so exactly like you said, homosexual behavior is totally normal and common in the animal kingdom. There are plenty of other species that are known to do this, including some other whale and dolphin species.
Hmm.
It's well documented for lots of cetacean species, and so wasn't particularly surprising
Right,
necessarily. It was just that this hadn't been known to occur in humpback whales before. This
right.
is the first time that we, could confirm, oh yes, humpback whales do this too.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think that's kind of cool to just imagine the first time we get copulation photos and it's two males, not a male and a female. I just think that's
Yeah.
it's just interesting to see. Um from a perspective of how this helps us understand humpback whales better. Where do you think this goes in terms of our understanding of humpback whales, and how do you think it'll help, for researchers and like such as yourself and others who study humpbacks, just in their understanding?
Yeah, so there's another aspect that was unique to this particular encounter, which was the condition of one of the whales.
Mm,
One of the whales involved in the encounter had an injury, which I suspect may have been from a ship strike, although we don't know for sure. And as a result, likely of this injury, it was in poor body condition, meaning it was really thin
hmm.
and it had whale lice all over its body. So
Mm,
that's usually a sign that a whale's low in energy and just isn't
right.
moving around as much and jumping around as much to shed off the whale lice as they normally do. So it was somewhat compromised. And so that again adds another layer of complexity to this particular encounter, and because of that, it's difficult to tease out what is normal humpback whale behavior and what is particular to this exact instance. And so, yeah, we can't draw too many conclusions about
Right.
humpback whales because of a single encounter. Obviously, it takes more than one observation before you can, make a determination about an entire species.
Of course.
But it certainly unlocks a lot of new questions for us as researchers. We are still uncovering aspects of humpback whales' social interactions and how
Mm,
individuals socialize and engage with each other on the breeding grounds and elsewhere. Traditionally, humpback whales are thought to be what's called a solitary species. So
hmm.
they don't really have long term bonds with other humpback whales, except for the bond between a mother and a calf in the first year of life.
Right.
But as we study them more, that preconceived notion is being challenged a little bit. There are some researchers in different areas like Southeast Alaska who are finding that the same humpback whales will meet up and feed cooperatively together year after year. And so maybe they're not so solitary after all. Uh, right now, we still have a lot more questions than answers about how they interact with each other and engage with each other. But this certainly is illuminating and will help us to look for these things in the future.
Absolutely. And you make a strong point. Like this is n is one of sample size. So we need to, hopefully we can gather more photographs and more observations of mating in the future. But just judging by the one is very difficult to judge an entire species by one interaction in terms of how they interact. Obviously, like as you mentioned, solitary animals, maybe they're not so solitary after all, especially in certain conditions or during certain times of the year, especially in the years of like mating and so forth and calving. How well do they interact? How they don't interact? So many questions that get to be revealed or being asked at this point. I think it must be exciting to be a humpback whale researcher right now for you and everybody else at Pacific Whale Foundation. What's sort of the general sort of state of everybody other than excited? What's everybody thinking about? What's everybody talking about, by the quote unquote water cooler or ocean when they when you guys are out on the boat?
Great question. Yeah, most of the comments I've gotten are, yeah, of course we see homosexual behavior in humpback whales.
Hmm.
Why wouldn't we? Like,
Hmm.
yeah, sure, that makes perfect sense. Nobody's particularly surprised by that.
Yeah.
Um, but it is raising questions about, well, does this give a new context that we can interpret other things that we see humpback whales doing? So, for example, here in the breeding grounds, the males will engage with each other in these competition groups,
Right.
which we interpret as a bunch of males competing for access to a female so that they can mate with that female. But again, that particular aspect of the competition group has never been observed or recorded. We
Mm.
don't know for sure that it does result in a mating happening. And researchers have seen competitive groups comprised entirely of male whales with no female in the group
Mm.
at all. And in the past, we've sort of not me particularly, but the
Yep.
scientific community has sort of interpreted that as maybe the males were a bit mixed up. Maybe there was just so many hormones and so much action, and they just didn't realize that there was a female missing from the group. But now that we have this observation,
Hmm.
maybe there's a different interpretation to that. Maybe they are looking to, have sexual interactions, males with other males.
Hmm.
We just don't really know yet.
Yeah, and it's interesting too to think of other mammals and how certain behaviors happen. Obviously, these are whales, so it's very different than something like a dog, right? But there's, maybe could it? Do you think it could be a dominance thing? Like you think, you see dogs kind of humping each other, not full copulation, but on each other, as a dominance thing. Has that ever been observed? Any kind of doms in other whales or other cetaceans, or in that respect, like to dominate
Mhm.
like a male group or something?
It is something that, yes, it is known to occur for some species. The ones that I'm more familiar with are dolphins, not necessarily whales, but dolphins get up to all kinds of aggressive behavior with each
Yeah.
other. But yeah, I agree that that is one of the scenarios that we considered and explored for this paper is that it could have been an act of dominance or aggression from one whale
Hmm.
to the other. Given that we know they are already competing with each other on the breeding grounds, so it could
Hmm.
be an extension of that. It could just be that they're on the breeding grounds. They're looking to mate. They're going to mate with any whale that's willing, and they're not too discriminating. Like again, we just don't really know
Right.
exactly how mating happens
No, of
and
course.
at all about that process.
Yeah.
And the other theory that we put forth in the paper is that it could have been a form of bonding, socializing between two individuals. And that sounds strange to us as humans, but it
Hmm.
is something that other species of cetaceans do. That they will engage in male male sexual behavior as a way of forming bonds between two individuals. So any of those scenarios could be the case. We don't want to make any conclusions about this is definitely what was going on.
Right.
And it's also important that we, remember that these are animals and interpreting animal behavior is quite difficult to do. We don't want to look at it through a human perspective, but you have to look at it through, as a biologist, an evolutionary perspective.
Yeah, for sure. With the breeding grounds and the work that you guys have done, and other researchers have done, have you done work where you've identified specific individuals? Like, do you have documentation of just sort of behaviors of individuals, like, based on photographic evidence, or photographic observations and tagging and things like that? Do you have observations on characteristics of behavior of different individuals within the humpbacks that come to breed?
So that was another aspect of this particular encounter that was really beneficial to us, is that the photographers were able to capture identification photos of both of the whales. So they knew enough about whale research to know that we use the underside of the tails to track and identify humpback whales as individuals over space and time. So they captured really great ID photos. And I was able to use those to know who are these whales. And luckily, they had both been documented previously by researchers and fairly well documented, in fact.
Nice.
So we knew that one of them was just about 30 years old, first seen in 1993, and had good few number of sightings over the years in Hawaii and elsewhere. And then the second animal was also an adult, but a bit younger at roughly 13 years old. And so, knowing the history of these whales, where they had been seen before, and what was going on with them in those previous encounters, really helped me to interpret this
Yeah.
particular interaction. And so that was great additional piece of data. So photo identification is one of the, you know, it's a real backbone of
Yeah.
studying humpback whales. A lot of organizations do photo ID work and maintain these long-term catalogs so that you can look for trends over time and changes over time. And that's a big part of my work. Um, you were asking about using that, can we uncover things about individual behaviors in whales?
Hmm.
Uh, it's not it's not something that I've really looked into, to be
Hmm.
honest. And just off the top of my head, I would say in some cases, yes, but it's more the exception than the norm. So there's a
Gotcha.
few whales that, are very well studied and we know them so well. We know a lot about them. And they do have some traits or characteristics that are kind of unique to that whale.
Stephanie, how important was it to have those two photographers, Lyle and Brandy, familiar with the program that you guys run? So familiar with sort of the citizen science aspect, what needed to be taken in terms of the photographs, like, the identification, like you said, underneath the tail to make sure that you can identify the individuals, all that kind of particulars that go with the program. How important was it to have two people who were in the area at this time be able to have that familiarity with the program and be able to take those snaps just in case something epic happened, just like it did? How important was that for you and the program and just studying humpbacks in general?
So Brandy and Lyle happened to be in the right place at the right time, and luckily enough with their cameras on board the boat. But in addition to that, one really valuable and important aspect of this story is their knowledge of humpback whales and the citizen science or community science component. So the two of them have spent many years involved in the tourism industry and photography of humpback whales. And because of this, they have learned a lot about the animals, and they've worked with researchers like myself. So they both knew that the underside of the whales were different between males and females, and they knew what to look for in sexing the animals and telling them apart. They both knew to obtain tail fluke photos so that we could identify the animals involved in this encounter. And having that information is just invaluable to a researcher like myself. It's incredibly difficult to study humpback whales because they live most of their lives under the water, not at the surface of the water. And we as researchers can only spend so many days at sea collecting data. a lot of our work is a desk job and is working through data and writing up reports and papers. And so being able to work with people who are on the water, like these two community scientists, is really powerful and is advancing our knowledge in ways that are just amazing.
It just goes to show that it's right to have a citizen science program in place. It's right to have people trained up, because you never know who's going to be at sea. You never know who's going to be able to capture what they captured. And it just goes to show that you have the right people in the right place at the right time. You can do some great things. And so thank you to Lyle and Brandy for capturing that in sort of for us all. And of course, thank you to Stephanie. Unfortunately, Stephanie and I had some technical difficulties at the end of, well, actually throughout the interview. So we had to cut the interview short. It's all on my end, not on Stephanie's. I had to upgrade my Mac OS, and it's not playing nice with my internet. And so I apologize to Stephanie for that. She was very patient throughout the entire interview. And I want to thank her for being on the podcast. She's been doing a huge flurry of press tours and podcast tours, and I do appreciate her. When I reached out, she was gung-ho for being on the podcast, and it really helped. So thank you for her for being on this podcast. And just what an episode, what an event to capture by it just goes to show, like, you never know what you're going to capture. They were able to just put their cameras in the water, taking amazing pictures, like a series of amazing pictures, which we're able to share some of those on the podcast, and to say, hey, look, like this is happening. We finally caught them in the act. And when we caught them in the act, of copulation, it was a little bit different than what we at first anticipated, where it was two males instead of a male and a female. And that, I think, tells you something about nature, and tells you just sort of how many more questions we can ask and how many more things we need to discover about these humpback whales. As Stephanie said, she mentioned that these are incredibly difficult animals to study. There's not a lot known about them, and considering how much research has been out, we're slowly learning about them as we go along. And it's just unbelievable that we can keep capturing and discovering new things about these animals and open up a slew of questions to be able to answer later on down the road. And it just goes to show that there's so much more research that needs to be done to understand our world, to understand marine mammals, to understand the ocean. And that's how we're going to be able to protect it and better protect it. So I want to thank Stephanie for being on the podcast. I'll put a bunch of her socials, as I mentioned at the beginning. Follow her. She really tells a great story, and a number of different stories of what her life is like in the field, what it's like in the office. It's just really telling of a marine biologist that lives in Maui, a beautiful place where she lives, and it's just a great job that she has. She truly has an amazing job. So check that out. And of course, don't forget to subscribe or follow and share these episodes. And of course, if you want to get a hold of me, you can DM me on Instagram at How to Protect the Ocean, or go to speakupforblue.com/contact to contact me through my email. So thanks again to Stephanie. Thank you all for listening to this episode. This has been another episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.